I am now joined by Chuck Blahous. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He's one of two public trustees for Social Security and Medicare, and he's also the author of a book, Social Security, The Unfinished Work, on how we can save Social Security while growing benefits. I obviously will be disagreeing with that. He's also got an opinion piece, I think it's in today's Wall Street Journal. Nobody is proposing to slash Social Security benefits, which I suppose is true and unfortunate because we need to make substantial cuts in Social Security before it bankrupts the entire country. Anyway, Chuck, are you with me?
I am. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for being a guest. First of all, is this? I guess this is an op-ed that you wrote in the Wall Street Journal?
That's right. It appeared in the Wall Street Journal yesterday morning.
Oh, so it's yesterday's paper. And apparently, because I guess is it the Democrats are accusing the Republicans of wanting to slash Social Security, which I guess is a popular criticism because everybody wants to accuse their political opponents of slashing Social Security because it strikes fear into the hearts of all the people who are expecting to get Social Security checks and to those who are currently receiving them. But I guess, so what's your point? Is there anybody that's actually recommending that we cut Social Security? I mean, other than me?
Well, again, a lot of this comes down to the art of how you define a cut. I think when most people hear the word cut benefits, they think the benefits are going to go down relative to people or what people are getting now. And the great irony of all this is that if we dither long enough and if we don't repair the program's finances, we ultimately will be in that place because there's a huge disconnect between what the program is promising to pay and the revenues it'll have available to pay that. But if we were to act now and if we were to repair program finances now, benefits wouldn't go down from current levels. You wouldn't have to change benefits for people now in retirement, and actually the benefits paid to people in the future would actually be higher than they are today, even relative to inflation. And that's true under Republican plans. It's true under Democratic plans. It's true under the President's Commission's plan. It's true under every plan. And so this idea that somehow people need to be frightened of reform because their benefits would be, quote, slashed it's really ironic and misleading because it's really the status quo that threatens that potential outcome, not reform if it were enacted today.
Right, but you actually believe that it's possible for the government to maintain Social Security in its current form and to continue to pay benefits to everybody who's been promised a benefit?
Yes, just the question is what level of benefit are you going to pay? And a good portion of my article really focused on this quirk of the Social Security benefit formula that was created in the 1970s, where benefits are indexed to grow with the national average.
Well, I mean, what
wage
about people that are in their 20s and 30s right now who are paying basically 15% of their income in Social Security taxes up to about $100,000 or so? Of course, the employer pays some of it, but it just simply is money taken out of their wages. So are those individuals, I mean, are you believing that they're going to get a good return, that when they retire, that they're going to get an adequate retirement, a commensurate to, let's say, what they could have done if they had all that money, investing it in a funded a pension plan or retirement plan over their working careers?
Well, there's a couple of really important issues that you raised here. One is, are they going to get a good return? And the answer to that is clearly no. That's true no matter what we do. And that's actually one of the great points of confusion about the current Social Security system, that somehow if we stick with our current benefit formulas, that we're creating some type of benefit equity from one generation to the next. That's just not how the program works. Because of demographics and because of the way the program is financed, it's not a savings program, it's an income transfer program. So whenever the ratio of tax-paying workers to beneficiaries declines, as it does when the population is aging, then subsequent generations have to pay a higher and higher tax rate to get the current.
Right. So in other words,
formula.
It's not really a good deal for the people who are paying the taxes right now. It's a good deal for the people who are collecting benefits today who paid relatively low taxes when they were working, but it's a lousy deal for people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who are going to pay huge taxes but are going to get relatively little in the way of benefits. Is that what you're saying?
relative to their tax contributions, they're going to get a lousy deal. And so the
But then why should they support it? I mean, why should they be in favor of a lousy deal? Why wouldn't they just want out of the system? If it's not to their benefit, if people today are losing because of Social Security, if they're being made poorer, if their retirement is being made less secure because they're forced into it, why would they want to continue it? Why wouldn't they want out?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One, it would be nice if we didn't have this problem. Unfortunately, we're stuck with it. Unless we're going to cut off benefits now for people who are in retirement, younger generations, just because of the nature of the program, are stuck paying for the benefits of people.
Yeah, well,
who are
do you
now
think that's fair?
rolls.
I think it makes more sense to cut the benefits for the retirees rather than raise taxes on the young or keep taxing the young. I mean, why should we be transferring all this wealth from one generation to another? What's fair about that?
Well, you're actually making my point. This is exactly the point that I'm trying to make, which is that if you stick with the current benefit formulas, what we're going to do is we're going to have higher and higher tax rates on younger generations. And so when we stand up, as the president did before the country, and says we must not slash benefits, if you define slashing benefits in relation to the current benefit formula, you're basically announcing you're going to hit younger generations with huge tax increases. Now, the reality is we don't have to have this current benefit formula. It's actually unaffordable. We can have benefits that simply grew with, for example, inflation, and you could avoid those tax increases. The current benefit formula, which was instated in the late 1970s, causes benefits to grow enormously in real terms. And the cost of paying that, when you have a lot more people in retirement and you're paying them each higher benefits on a per capita basis, that amounts to huge tax increases on younger generations. So,
yeah, and do you have any idea, I guess, how high those taxes might go to maintain these?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, from the last trustees report, we know how high they'll have to go. Right now, well, things are a little bit distorted now because of the current recession, but I think the clearest way to think about it is that before the baby boomers hit their retirement rolls, workers had to pay about one out of every $8 they earned to support Social Security. Mm-hmm. And by the 2030s, that's going to be one out of every 6. Now, that's for one federal program if we don't change the benefit formula. You throw in Medicare, we're talking about one out of every $3 that workers earn to support 2 federal programs.
So, in other words, you're talking about taxes at least doubling from where they are now.
For Social Security and Medicare combined, that's where we're headed.
Right, and so rather than basically 15% of payroll, you're talking about 30% of payroll, and on top of which, they're still going to have to pay income taxes to fund all the other aspects of government and interest on the national debt. Now, is it realistic to assume that many young people will remain in this country if tax rates go that high, or will they escape and flee north to Canada, south to Mexico, maybe head out to Australia, New Zealand, maybe go to Asia, maybe go someplace else? What if they don't stay here and pay what if they leave? Then what are people on Social Security going to do? Who are they going to tax when all the young people leave the country?
Well, there is another potential bad outcome that could happen, which is one we've seen in Europe, which is that if people are subject to the tax burdens of funding of progressively more generous benefits for the elderly, they basically stop having kids because their resources are oriented towards going to pay for previous generations' benefits rather than raising the next generation. So in Europe, there's been a very demonstrated relationship between, say, fertility rates and the cost of public pension systems, retirement systems, healthcare systems. And I think we really are playing with fire when we say, let's just leave all the current benefits on the table, say that they're inviolate, we can't, quote, slash them relative to what we're currently promising, and it's bound to have a very undesirable impact on the amount of tax-paying workers that we have.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, when we come back, I want to ask you some very important questions, seeing that you were on the Board of Trustees. So I want to talk about 2 things. I want to talk about the trust funds themselves and whether or not they actually exist. And I want to talk about what the difference might be between Social Security and a Ponzi scheme. So think about that for a minute. And we'll be right back after this commercial break. You're listening to The Peter Schiff Show on SchiffRadio.com.
The Peter Schiff Show. Since the Peter Schiff Show was last on the air, the national debt added another $7.89 million. Luckily, Peter's intelligence is growing twice as fast.
That's incredible.
Welcome back to your source of sanity in an insane world. It's the Peter Schiff Show.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Peter Schiff, and I am talking with my guest Charles Blahous, who is a trustee for Social Security and Medicare. And so I want to talk a little bit about the actuarial solvency of Social Security. First of all, Charles, do you know what a Ponzi scheme is?
I do indeed.
Okay, so could you describe to me the difference between Social Security and a Ponzi scheme?
Well, I would say this. The difference is largely one of intent. I mean, obviously, a Ponzi scheme, you have something of an intent to defraud. But there are.
Well, I'm not talking about the intent. I'm talking about what it actually is. I mean, how a Ponzi scheme is financed. Is there a difference between the way a Ponzi scheme is financed and the way Social Security is financed?
Well, there's certainly strong similarities. I mean,
but is there a difference? Is there any difference?
I
can answer the question. The only difference is you're required to participate in this Ponzi scheme, whereas private Ponzi schemes are voluntary. But the fact of the matter is, just because the government mandates everybody participate doesn't validate a Ponzi scheme. It doesn't make it work. A question I had for you on the trust funds, because you're a trustee and you look at the trust funds. Is Social Security solvent or is it broke?
Well, it is certainly it's not broke yet, but it's certainly projected to be insolvent.
Well,
and
how is it not broke? I mean, what resources does Social Security have? Isn't it true that right now, for this year, in 2010, last year, that Social Security actually paid out more in benefits than it collected in taxes?
That's absolutely true.
So then how is it not broke? And it has all these obligations to future retirees. It has trillions of dollars of contingency liabilities. How are they solvent?
Right. Now, first of all, it's not solvent over the long term, and right now...
But how is it solvent right now if it's running in the red?
It's running in the red, and it's only solvent in the sense that the government has a legal obligation to fill up that gap between incoming taxes and outgoing benefits right now.
Based on what? What legal obligation?
Basically, the trust fund consists of bonds issued by the Treasury Department, and the Social Security system has the legal right to call on those bonds as required to make up any gap.
But if the government doesn't have the money, it doesn't. Well, first of all, let's even talk a little about these trust funds. So because this is like a misnomer, because we talk about Social Security trust funds as if there's actually any money there. Can you describe, what if there was no trust fund at all? Would there be any difference for Social Security if the trust fund didn't exist as far as the way the government would go about making Social Security payments?
From the taxpayer's perspective, there's no aggregate difference. The only difference is distributional. If there were no trust fund, we'd have to pay the entirety of benefits through the payroll tax. You still have to pay it all with taxes, but because of the trust fund, it's a blend. There's part of it that comes from the payroll tax, and part of it comes from the general taxes that people pay to make up any gap in the Social Security
system. Right, so in other words, as far as the government is concerned, the fact that there's not a trust fund in the sense that most of us would think there's a trust fund, as if like there's some asset there that the government can tap into to make these payments. The only way the government can make payments is by raising taxes, which is the same thing as having no trust fund at all.
Right. Economically, we're in exactly the same boat. And
so why even talk? Isn't it even deceptive? Right? I mean, doesn't it kind of sound like fraudulent when congressmen or senators talk about a Social Security trust fund as if there's actually something there, that there's some fund there that we can trust, that there's some asset that the government can actually use to make Social Security benefits, as opposed to just raising taxes to pay the benefits?
Well, I happen to believe, this is actually one of the reasons why I wrote my book, that the confusion over the trust fund is it's the single biggest source of public confusion over Social Security finances, beyond question.
Right, but obviously it's deliberate intent on the part of the government. It's not an accident that the public is confused. The government wanted people to believe that Social Security was insurance. That's why they call the taxes premiums. I mean, that's why they have a phony trust fund. It's to create a false sense that there's actually something there, that it's like a funded retirement system. People always say, hey, I paid into Social Security all my life, as if they paid into some kind of fund. They paid into nothing. They paid taxes. That's all. The money was spent, and there's nothing but worthless IOUs in a phony trust fund.
I'm with you part of the way on this, and this is actually my favorite chapter of my book, Chapter 2, which is all about how we got this big trust fund. that is a lot more accidental than anyone realizes. And I think the story is actually very interesting. But I think you're making a really important point. In 1983, which is the last time we were in this situation, everybody understood we had a problem. Taxes were not enough to fund outgoing benefits. Republicans understood that was a problem. Democrats understood that was a problem. Now, they disagreed on how to fix that, but they agreed that the problem was there. Right now, you have a lot of people who don't understand that we have a problem, and it's because we have this big trust fund on paper. So you have a lot of people saying, oh, the system is solvent till 2037, even though economically we're in very much the same position. Now, the reason this all came about actually was very accidental, and this is one of the stories that I think people have forgotten. There's been this failure of national memory about what happened in 83. In 83, when they negotiated the last big Social Security rescue, they thought so little of this idea of the trust fund, they didn't even include it in their calculations. They didn't count the assets of the trust fund when they did their actuarial balance calculations. Everyone now assumes that they must have
right. Well, because the assets in the trust fund are simultaneously liabilities to the government. It's as I've said, it's like writing yourself a check for $1 million and claiming you're a millionaire.
Right. Now, what happened? What happened is we got these reforms in 1983 that had the effect of creating substantial annual surpluses in Social Security over the last couple of decades, and then they were going to be followed by huge deficits after that. Now, we all know what happened. The government used those surpluses and spent them. And so as a method of financing future Social Security benefits, that doesn't work. That only works if you actually take those surpluses and save them in some way, which is not what happened. But a lot of people look back and say, well, it must have been the intention to run these big surpluses, build up this big trust fund, and save this money. It actually wasn't even the intention at all. What actually happened was that the Greenspan Commission couldn't agree on a complete unified plan. And so they went to Congress and said, here's a bunch of provisions we can agree on. You fill in the rest of the program to try to get us to solvency. And it wasn't until the solution was just about to be enacted that anyone realized, whoops, we actually created this so-called balance out of a gargantuan deficits in the later years offset by surpluses in the earlier years.
And the problem now, though, is not only is the federal government borrowing tremendous amounts of money for stimulus and all kinds of government projects that Obama wants to fund, but now we actually have to borrow money to pay today's Social Security benefits because the taxes aren't enough to make the current benefits. So the government is not only selling bonds to pay for national defense, but it's selling bonds to pay for Social Security benefits to current retirees.
Right. And I think a lot of, for example, if you look at, say, I think most people in sort of the fiscal center on the conservative side, they kind of recognize this empirical reality. You do have some hardcore defenders of trust fund accounting on the far left, but I think most people in the middle and on the right realize, hey, we have not created a mechanism for financing these growing Social Security benefit obligations over the next couple of decades.
Don't you see a ticking time bomb or with a very short fuse where interest rates are rising, our budget is going out of control, rates could spike up to 10 or 15%, the government might have to spend $1 trillion or more interest on the national debt, people don't want to buy these bonds, the Fed is monetizing them, inflation runs through the roof. I mean, isn't this thing going to end very badly in a short period of time unless we actually make some serious cuts in government spending right now, including cuts to current and people who are about to retire on Social Security?
I'm with you part of that way. I mean, first of all, I totally agree. We need to take decisive action. We need to take it soon. The point of my article is that we can actually afford to pay our current level of Social Security benefits. We just can't afford to pay what we're scheduled to have in terms of increased benefits going forward.
But we can afford it only to the extent that we screw all the young people. But why is that fair?
Well,
why should we
screwed
hold them?
They're either going to get screwed with higher taxes, or they're going to get a slower rate of benefit growth. And
Well, why don't we just phase this thing out? Because obviously it's a rotten deal. My solution is let the young people off the hook. They didn't vote for this program. It's not fair. And if there are people who are rich who can afford to take care of themselves, they're not going to keep getting Social Security payments. We're just subsidizing the inheritance of richer kids at the expense of poor kids. And if people are actually destitute and broke, then let them get their Social Security checks. But let's call it what it is. It's welfare, because that's what it is. It's not Social Security because it's all being paid from the same pot.
So you're actually advocating cutting people off now who are on Social Security?
If they don't need the money,
what you're proposing.
Yeah, rather than taxing the young people. Especially there are a lot of people now who are getting Social Security who have been getting it for so long. They've already got a fantastic return on whatever they put in. It's all the rest of it is at the expense of the young. But anyway, we're running out of time. I can hear the music. Hey, I appreciate you coming on my show and talking candidly about Social